what are the architect's main responsibilities under this appointment? Really important question, and I'm sure everybody wants to come in on this one. Well, let's start at this end. Let's see what Dieter has to say.
The new documents obviously enshrine what's in the code. So there is, as we've discussed, the reasonable skill and care obligation. So that's care to your clients, care to the rest of the team, and making sure you're discharging your duties properly. It's making sure you're meeting the obligations to inform your client about what you will, and most importantly, what you won't be doing as well. So bearing in mind that you don't include in the appointment what you're not going to be delivering. So you've got that clear scope of services we've discussed, we've got the fee, we've got the programme, and the certainty that everyone can rely on, this is what's going to happen.
I'm going to ask a question which perhaps Mark hadn't anticipated. Yes, we know there's a duty of care and a duty to inform. What happens if everything changes during the course of the contract and your duty of care suddenly expands, or the information becomes very difficult, very convoluted by other parties? What is your duty then?
Well, I think the starting point, as Steve says, is the duty of care. And from an insurance perspective as well, insurers will want to know that the architect has signed up to perform to a standard that can be subject to an objective test. And if you've established that objective test, and the objective test really is what would a representative body of your fellow professionals have done in those circumstances. So once you've got that objective test, in a way, if the circumstances change, it doesn't really matter. Well, I mean, it obviously matters in a practical sense,
yes,
your response to it, but the what's expected of you is a constant, which is that you've got to respond in a way that is appropriate and objectively appropriate in the changing circumstances.
I wonder, Barbara, whether all small practitioners will understand this, will understand what the duty of care actually is to a client. Duty to inform is perhaps a little easier to understand, but what about this duty to inform? Do small practices know that well enough to take that as read, but perhaps not the duty of care? What is your thought?
I think both have their pitfalls, don't they? If you work with very inexperienced clients, it can sometimes be just on a personal level quite difficult to break them the sometimes inconvenient or even disturbing truth where the project is going or what their wishes might entail. But I think that's the reality of our role as professionals.
Well, most domestic clients undertake projects with architects very, very, in some cases, only once in their life. But
that's right, and always very emotionally involved.
Yes,
and
it's their home.
And one of the things I do enjoy about the new contracts is that there are sort of separate headings in them for the brief, the program, and the construction cost. Because I think these are three things that have to be clear at the beginning of a project, but very often are not. And we encounter clients who are either they really don't know how much money they want to put into this project, or they are really cagey about it because they somehow feel if they don't reveal, they might get a better deal. And it's just unbelievable the kind of conversation we have around these points. But it's in the contract. This conversation must be had. We need to know what the construction cost is we are working to. And if we don't know, then we can say, okay, we don't know, so we have to do a feasibility study. Please, this is the scope for our feasibility study, and these are our fees for the feasibility study. It's a checklist. It's really, really helpful because without this knowledge, we cannot do a good job.
Very good.
I think this might be a good opportunity to put a little plug in for the RIBA's briefing toolkit, because
Go on then.
because the contract it's designed to work with the contract, but the briefing toolkit encourages the client and the architect to make sure that they've got an understanding of obviously the scope, the cost of the building. You know, how many times, I'm guessing particularly on smaller projects, but also on larger projects, not have that great deal of certainty about the outturn cost of the project. And for smaller projects, thinking about things like, will there be VAT to pay? Is there a sudden, sudden jump in the cost that I just hadn't reckoned with in my, as a client in my calculations? Have I accounted for the cost of the fees, the professional fees that I'm going to pay, not just the architect, but potentially others, and for things like statutory regulations and so on, planning and building regulations. So the briefing toolkit is something which is free to download for charter members, and I think it's the sort of thing which works really well with these appointments.
Thanks very much, RIBA. Excellent bit of information there.
May I just come back to the duty of care?
I was hoping you were going to come back to it.
Because I think one thing we have to be very careful of as architects is in our enthusiasm to win work and in our enthusiasm to seduce clients, there is a danger we oversell ourselves. And through that, there can be a risk that we raise that bar and that duty of care. As Mark was explaining, we get judged on the duty of care by the standard that the other architects are performing at. If we then say, well, we're experts at this and we specialise in this, you're suddenly raising yourself above the standard level to then a specialist level. And in our enthusiasm, say, I'm the best, you want to employ me, you can inadvertently raise that duty of care. So you have to be very careful with that, and particularly how you would then enshrine what you do in your contract to make sure you don't do that inadvertently.
I think there's another point which...
No,
sorry. Because the contract says, it compares your duty of care with other people who work in the same field, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And I think this could be construed by, well, this is really a huge obstacle for us to break into a new sector, to do something we haven't done before. But it doesn't have to be. All it means that if we want to break into a new sector, do something that we haven't done before, we just have to put the extra time in and the extra legwork and the extra research to make sure we can perform this task as well as someone who has done it before. I think that's all this clause means. Or
collaborate with another practice that already has that skill
else.
That you can...
but somehow make sure you can raise your skill level to the level of the general field who have done this kind of work before.
Presumably, though, for small practices, they won't be able to offer every service that every job's going to require.
No, of
whether
course
it's
not.
within their experience or not. So presumably, they will then go out and get that experience and bring it in to the team.
Yeah.
But providing they've told the client that's what they're going to do, that's their duty of care covered, is it not?
Absolutely.
There we go.
I mean, spookily, that's what I was going to say. It's the same sort of point. But and actually, that's I think an advantage of the recent RIBA terms, because there is a difference between sort of like the median duty of care, where you're judged against the profession, and then a slightly enhanced duty of care where you're judged against members of your profession who are experienced in jobs of a similar size, scope and complexity. But in practical terms, if you are trying to break into that, you wouldn't be able to sort of pull it back to the sort of median. You wouldn't say to a client, well, I've never done anything like this before, but I'll have a bash, because they're not going to engage you. And I think the RIBA terms recognise that, because most, I'm sure you've seen this as well, most bespoke terms will have the slightly enhanced objective test.
All.
Yes, and that your experience, that you'll be compared with people who have the requisite experience, and a client is entitled to expect that the professional they've engaged has got the requisite experience. And the newer terms do actually say they enshrine that duty of care, so there's not a disparity, and I think that's quite right. That's practical and helpful.